Welcome everybody to our second industry webinar of the year. This time around, we're going to be looking at our 2020 outlook and what policies are affecting the bike industry on Capitol Hill. Joining me today, I have our Managing Director of the Signal Group and lobbyist, Charles Cooper, and Noah Banayan, our Federal Affairs Manager. I want to take a brief moment to thank all of our members of the People for Bikes Coalition. We couldn't do this great work without you all. If you're interested in pursuing coalition membership, please do email me at ericb@peopleforbikes.org. And with that, I'll hand things over to Charles and Noah to get us started.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. Today's webinar will run through, Charles will talk about the current political landscape in DC, so everything you're hearing on the news and then actually what's happening behind that. We'll talk about policies that are relevant to the bike industry, and that really leads into why we're working in DC. Why is PFB there fighting for the bike industry in Congress and in the administration? And then we'll give you some options to get involved. So hopefully you'll leave this webinar feeling inspired to take some actions for bikes and bike policy. And we have plenty of opportunities and ways to do that, and look forward to engaging with you that way. And then if you have questions at the end or do want to get more involved, please reach out. My email is there on the screen. It's my first name at peopleforbikes.org.
I'm really excited to be part of this webinar to talk through a little bit about the landscape in Washington, D.C. As most of you know, Washington, D.C. has been plagued with hyperpartisanship for a long time. In fact, this is probably the most partisan Washington has been in a very long time. We're also very close to the 2020 election cycle. The primary season has already started. There will be more than 20 primary elections over the next 30 days. There's a lot of attention on politics, and most people believe that that's coming at the expense of advancing meaningful policy. And also, Americans generally don't think Congress is doing a lot. So with that picture, a lot of people doubt that policy over the next year is possible. And I think what Noah and I would say after some significant analysis is that there actually is a lot happening, and there's a lot more to happen on the horizon. If you look at 2019, in the end of 2019, there was an incredible amount of policy that moved that was all done on a bipartisan basis. Maybe didn't make the headlines, but got to the president's desk and was signed into law nonetheless. And that included things like all funding for the entire federal government, a number of large policy bills that deal with the Department of Defense, a number of bills that deal with everything from public lands to transportation that are starting to move through the process. And in 2020, we're looking at a pretty robust year of legislative activity. And that's really for a few reasons. One, there's a ton of bipartisan work going on behind the scenes on what I would refer to as below the fold issues. These are issues that maybe don't make the headlines in newspapers, but are significant and have a Republican and Democrat champion working together to get those across the finish line. Secondly, there's a number of deadlines that are going to force action on legislation over the coming year, and that's largely because federal funding expires at some point. The large transportation bill, which we're very focused on, expires pretty soon. And there's a number of other bills that are facing sort of these deadlines where Congress is forced to act. And also, because it's an election year, policymakers are looking for wins. They want to be able to go back to their states and districts and talk about legislation that was passed in Congress while they were there. And this year is going to be a venue to pass that kind of legislation. So regardless of sort of the broader narrative out there, I think from our standpoint, we're looking at 2020 as a really strong policy year, and it highlights something a lot of people sort of don't appreciate, which is that policy and politics can happen at the same time, and partisanship and bipartisanship can also happen at the same time. A lot of the members and staff that we're working with they're working across the aisle to try to come to consensus on issues that are important to bikes and other issues. And we're trying to foster that and continue to work on a bipartisan basis to try to get these things across the finish line. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Noah.
Thanks, Charles, for that background and outlook. And part of what Charles mentioned and takes up a lot of our time in DC is this really fantastic bipartisan opportunity to reauthorize transportation policy. What I mean by that is in September of this year, funding for major transportation programs that include bike programs and infrastructure programs for biking will expire. So our work right now is to find ways in that reauthorization where funding increases for bike programs and the programs themselves increase in scope so that we have more infrastructure going into your backyard and into your communities. And so all of this, even though it's happening at the federal level, trickles down and helps to create the best bike lane in your neighborhood and the cycle track that's helping kids get to school and everything in between. So that's a huge opportunity for the bike industry this year. And it's really where we need the industry to work with us in DC and to talk to these lawmakers about how these funding programs really do benefit communities. We'll get into that a little bit more later. Some of the other policies that we're looking at outside of just funding and transportation is safety and climate and public lands and all of those things that make biking great when we're working with them. When we talk about safety, it can be difficult in the bike industry to acknowledge how important it is and how much more we need to be doing from an industry side and how much the government needs to be doing to help keep people on bikes safe. And whether that's on a trail or whether that's in a bike lane or a share-o or a cycle track, and for whatever type of trip it is, we know that biking increases when people feel safer. And we think that Congress ought to be doing more to incentivize local communities to build safer infrastructure. Part of that comes from these funding programs that we talk about in this reauthorization. And generally, we know that safety improves when it's a policy priority, and that's at the federal, state, and local levels. So we're fighting to make sure that people in DC and lawmakers here go back home and recognize that safety is what's going to grow this incredible industry in their districts and in their states. Another huge opportunity we have this year, and might even be surprisingly bipartisan, is around climate and climate change. We can look at bikes as part of a solution to climate change. They're carbon-free form of transportation that we can be incentivizing in urban areas for commuting. They're also a form of recreation that's carbon neutral and doesn't emit anything. We can also look at climate in the lens of, are trails resilient? Are they going to be able to stand up to changes in climate? And how can we better protect our favorite places to ride in the woods and near beaches and places that are facing a change in climate and potential erosion or sea level rise, things like that? How can we be prioritizing maintenance on these places, one, to keep them safe and also to keep them enjoyable, because that's ultimately why they're used. And to that end, we know that public lands and recreational riding needs a boost in funding. When you look at our national parks and the opportunities they offer in other public lands, we love them and they're great, but they need a boost. And part of what we're working on is making sure that bills are passed to better fund maintenance and work on this backlog of maintenance that's happening on our public lands. Lastly, what we'll talk about is e-bikes. We all know that e-bikes are part of the future of biking. That's already been written into the industry story. We need to make sure that lawmakers recognize that, and that when we're planning for the future of transportation recreation on bikes, e-bikes are included, and that we have the infrastructure and the resources to support that as this sector of the industry grows. So, we just ran through a bunch of policies and the specific issue areas, and something I mentioned is that this isn't just Charles and my job alone. We need the industry support here. We're in DC every day talking to lawmakers and to their staff and to agencies about the need for biking, and we will continue to do that. But the story is so much stronger when it's coming from a business owner and someone who works in manufacturing with the bike industry, or from a shop owner that has seen economic transformations in their business corridor. So when we have folks come to DC through whichever means it is, or through talking to your representatives at home, that helps this in a way that it's just exponential. And you'll see here in that picture, we've got Senator McSally from Arizona talking to our friend Brandy Leapak of the National Bicycle Dealers Association. So this is part of us. What we do is connect all of you guys in the industry to Congress, and we want to make sure that we're being as helpful as we can in those connections. And also, part of this is to cultivate champions in Congress for bikes. Some of them will just not realize how big of an industry it is in their hometowns and how much of a benefit bikes can bring to their constituents. So part of what we're doing is cultivating champions that we can rely on to sponsor and lead on certain issues in Congress as we work on this. And lastly, Congress responds to industries that speak up. If they're not hearing from you, they don't know what's going on. So we know, and you know, we know that from just historically, they do respond well when they're hearing constantly and consistently and regularly from the industries and from the constituencies that have a really big stake in their communities. So this is the fun part, is getting involved. So how can you help us, and how can we help you better? You can always call your member of Congress's office or your senator's office where your business is or where you're located. And if you call that number, it's the Capitol switchboard, and they'll connect you to the right office. And tell them to sponsor legislation and prioritize issues that make every bike ride better. If you want more details on what those issues are and what I mean by this reauthorization, please do give me an email, and we'll set up a time to talk and find the best way for you to get engaged. If you're based near DC or ever visiting, let us know and we will put you to work. We'll get you in meetings on the Hill in front of your hometown legislators and their staff. And one of the best ways to do that is to join our annual fly-ins. We host about 3 a year, and we just released our dates a few weeks ago for this year in 2020, so please let us know if you're interested. We generally focus on a group of retailers that come in March. In June, we bring all the best and brightest leading women in the industry for a women-specific fly-in, and then later in the year, we bring other executives in as well. And lastly, we highly encourage you to invite your representative and your senators to your business or your headquarters, wherever that may be in the country. That's a part of their job, is customer service and meeting with their constituents and the businesses in their district, because they want to be able to show off what makes their hometown great. And we know that your business, your bike business, is a part of that. We have the contacts to help make that happen in the district and in state. So please do let us know if that's something you're interested in, and we'll work to make it happen. There's so many more ways you can get involved. These are just sort of the 3 that we generally advertise. And if there's other things that you're interested in or connections you'd like to make, please do just reach out to us. We're here to be a service to the industry in DC and help amplify the voice of the industry. So we're looking forward to working with you.
Well, thank you very much to Noah and Charles for being with us today and giving us a little bit of the policy outlook for 2020 this year. Please do shoot us your questions at noah@peopleforbikes.org and Eric b@peopleforbikes.org. We'll do our best to get back to you within that 24-hour time period. And never hesitate to reach out if you're interested in becoming a coalition member as well. Thank you all very much.